Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Matt and welcome back to the channel and my creaky chair. Today I wanted to go over a few differences between Final Cut Pro 10 and Premiere Pro. So just to give you guys a bit of backstory, I know a little bit about Final Cut Pro 10, but for the most part, for most of my professional projects, I've always been using Premiere Pro. So recently I got back from Japan, I wanted to create a little bit of a travel video, and I thought to myself, rather than going and doing the same thing, opening it in Premiere Pro and going through the same motions, I'm going to give it a shot in Final Cut Pro and see what the difference is like. Because obviously I see a lot of YouTubers talking about it all the time, how much they like Final Cut Pro 10, and I guess the speed of it in comparison to Premiere Pro. So I thought I'd give it a shot for myself. And over the last week, editing I guess, I found a few things that I really like and a few things I'm not such a big fan of. And today in this video I kind of wanted to go through what those things are, and I am pretty ignorant. Just as a disclaimer for this video, obviously I'm not a big Final Cut Pro user, so I'm going to say things in this video. If you use Final Cut Pro 10 and you know exactly what's going on and you could help me out, definitely leave a comment below and help me out. You know, hopefully if you are thinking about moving to Final Cut Pro 10 or using it, you can know what to expect before you jump into it. And this has just been my experience with it so far. First difference, when you import your footage, we're gonna go ahead and create an event. And I've gone ahead and created my event, Japan 2018. And as I imported all my stuff here, it's gone ahead and created dates for all of them, which is great because in Premiere Pro, if I jump back to my project in Premiere Pro, which obviously never got finished, my bin for my footage is just a whole bunch of random clips. And even if I go to something like a list view, it's kind of the same thing. I could see my video info or mark takes, which is great, but definitely not the same, especially in this context of doing a travel video, of seeing the different days that I was out and about, and I could kind of edit in a more linear way because I knew that this clip was from this day, this clip was from this day, whereas with Premiere Pro, I feel like, I'm not quite sure in this case, thankfully it has imported based on when I took the shot, but sometimes it doesn't always do that much. So I definitely give props to Final Cut Pro there. It was an interesting way of working. So with sort of selecting clips, I've been used to sort of double clicking them in the past, opening them in this window here and using the I and O key to sort of mark my in and out points and then put them onto the timeline. Whereas with Final Cut Pro, what I tended to do was I would see a clip and I would go ahead and select it and drag from where I thought I wanted it to be. Now, I've more recently found out that I can just go ahead and hit I and O exactly the same way and use my arrow keys to mark the exact frame. And this is beneficial to me because I feel like when I was using this method of kind of clicking and dragging, I tended to get it wrong sometimes. I would drag this to the timeline and then think and say to myself, that's not the right part of the frame that I wanted. So it was really good to just be able to hit the I and O keys, which I will definitely do next time I'm editing in Final Cut. The next thing is the timeline. Now, a lot of things I really like about this timeline and a lot of things I know people won't like about it either, depending on the project you're working on, I guess. For a travel video, amazing. And probably for YouTube videos as well, the speed is amazing. Just because what I can do is if I want to adjust this clip, for example, let's say this clip with the shrine, a lot of the times in Premiere Pro, and if I just show you an example now because I've got Premiere Pro open, what I'll need to do, if I've got this clip on the timeline, I'm going to need to drag it to another video track, and then I'm going to need to hold the Alt key, only because I've got an audio track here, hold the Alt key and drag outwards, and obviously Snap's not being my best friend, but if I drag outwards, I can then adjust that video clip, and then from there I could, if I wanted to, adjust it back and or what I probably wouldn't hold the Alt key there. I'd probably want to adjust it back this way and until a point at which I was able to, line it up again, drag it back down, maybe hold the Alt key to get that video clip extended back out. But in Final Cut Pro, what I can do is if I want to drag this video clip out, I can literally just click and drag it without needing to move tracks. And Final Cut automatically moves the next track up above it, which is excellent because then from there I can go ahead and edit this clip. And if I drag it back over, automatically that other clip drops back down. And yeah, I didn't need to do any kind of moving around in terms of audio tracks either, which is great. That's also a bit limiting because at the same time, audio is kind of linked up to the actual clips themselves. And it's a bit difficult to jump in and kind of edit them. You need to actually right click and hit detach audio, which I've actually already done for all these clips and deleted them all. So that was a bit of a different way of working as well, whereas obviously in Premiere Pro, I've got my audio tracks here, and I also have an audio clip mixer. I should also have an audio track mixer. And what I can also do is add some VST plugins, which is really powerful. I don't really have this stuff in Final Cut Pro, so what I did at the end of it is I kind of exported out my music and went to Audition and did everything I needed to do in Adobe Audition. And then I imported it back again as a flat mixed down track, as you can see here. I can obviously edit the gain, and I can envelope as well to create louder points of volume and softer points of volume, which is perfect for a lot of video projects. One of the things that I've been so used to in Premiere and was surprised to find out I couldn't do anything of the equivalent in Final Cut was an adjustment layer, at least not out of the gate. So obviously with Premiere, when you're editing, you've probably used this before. If you wanted to apply an effect that goes overall throughout all the clips, I'm gonna go ahead and jump back to my project here, create a new adjustment layer. And then from there, I'm gonna drag this. This is my adjustment layer. And then from there, obviously I could apply any effect that I would like to it. Let's say I wanted to apply Lumetri color and just apply a little bit of a rough color grade for whatever reason. I'm just gonna do a creative LUT. Yes, look at this. I'm gonna go ahead and create a monochrome Kodak. Oh, look at that. That's what I should have done. I should have made it all in black and white. I'm an idiot. Anyway, in Final Cut Pro 10, I didn't have that option. I kind of actually needed to go through this workaround where this guy, and I will link it down below in the description, but he's basically created an adjustment layer. You select through the titles page. So you actually put it into your titles folder. And then from there, I'm actually not even sure where it is these days. Yeah, miscellaneous, adjustment layer. And then I drag it down and it acts as a title, but it's an adjustment layer. And then from there, I was able to apply this letterboxing effect to go ahead and edit my project because I wanted it to be in a 2:3:5 aspect ratio. That's a really big thing, but I'm glad there was a workaround, obviously. Obviously with a simple plugin, very simple. And then from there, I could also apply my my color grade as well, which was awesome. This was a really weird one for me, actually. So when I first jumped into Final Cut Pro 10, the first thing I wanted to do, and I kind of briefly mentioned it, I wanted to work in a sort of 2:3:5 aspect ratio to make it a little bit more cinematic, as you do when you're making these travel YouTube videos. And so what I did, naturally, was I created my project in a 1920 by 818, 819, depending on the ratio. Anyway, pixel, but we're debating pixels here, for that aspect ratio. And I started to notice a few issues. So I think if I can try and show you now as quickly as I can. So I've got this example timeline here I wanted to show you guys, just to show you what happened to me at the start. So I tried to use it like Premiere. Premiere, I would create a new project and I would do it in the specific dimensions that I was going to be working in, what the final output would be. In this case, what I did was I created a 1920 by 818 project file. When you go ahead and you put a video clip down on a native timeline here in Final Cut, is that it doesn't actually preserve the aspect ratio of the timeline. It preserves the aspect ratio of the clip itself. This is probably a better one than this. So this is my clip of the beach. And as you can see, black bars on either side. I kind of need to zoom it in. If I just select here and zoom it in. And I didn't really want to do this because I didn't know if I was losing quality on the video clip, but it kind of gets even weirder than that. So let's say I've got this clip here, this surfer going by, drag it down to the timeline. I have to zoom it up again because, you know, as you do, you just, it's not the right aspect ratio. So I zoom it up to where I want it to be. And then from there, if I add a transition, so I'm going to go ahead and add a transition. With transition, I hit Command T for Final Cut, and I'm going to drag a transition in. Now, this isn't really that obvious unless you use something like this, right? So I've got this bokeh transition from a company called Pixel Film Studios. I drag and drop it. And this is what I started seeing. I started seeing the transition itself was in a 16:9 aspect ratio on a 2:3:5 timeline. And I had no idea how to fix it. And doing a bit of Google searching, it didn't seem like it was that common that people would work this way in Final Cut. So what I ended up doing in the end was obviously, I ended up creating a separate timeline or separate project in this case, with an adjustment layer, which was also a plugin as well, which had the letterbox effect applied to it. So overall, all of my clips had this letterboxing. And then it kind of led to this outputting of the project as well. So I try to output it. And if you try and output it from Final Cut and you go export, for example, or share, in this case, let's say share master file. I wanted to change the dimensions. And I couldn't do it because the project is 1920 by 1080, and that's all that Final Cut will let me export. And obviously, if you've seen some videos on YouTube that have done this, where they export out a video clip that's 16 by 9 in a 2:3:5 aspect ratio, it's really annoying, especially when you're watching it on a mobile device and you try and zoom in because it thinks this is the full clip. I definitely don't recommend doing that. So I did a bit of searching as well, and I found out I had to use compressor to actually create a bit of a template, which I've done here, 2:3:5 output. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole tutorial here. You can definitely find it, and I'll try and link that down below as well. But I've had to go ahead and do some cropping and change the aspect ratio of it. Again, stuff that in Premiere, all I've done from the start is I've gone ahead and created the project as a 1920 by 818 in this case project. And it's gone ahead and already done that cropping for me, and I can export it out straight away like this. So I really like that flexibility of Premiere in comparison to Final Cut in this particular case of working in this more cinematic aspect ratio. For a 1920 by 1080 project, I wouldn't have to worry about this as much. But just a tip as well, I turned off the letterboxing before exporting out from compressor, just because I also experienced some weird sort of pixels around the edges if I didn't turn off the letterboxing effect. There were things that I really, really liked about Final Cut Pro 10, and one of them which just was amazing compared to Premiere Pro is stabilization. Now, stabilization in Final Cut Pro 10 works really well, but also as well, it's super easy to enable. Now, this is something that in Premiere Pro, obviously you need to apply an effect, Warp Stabilizer. So if I jump over to Premiere Pro and show you this now, let me try and find a clip. This is a clip. I don't know if it has Warp Stabilizer applied. I don't think it does. So let's have a bit of a look, and I'm just going to turn on the volume. It's a bit shaky. Very hard to keep an unstabilized 55mm lens steady throughout all of Japan. So I'd want to add some Warp Stabilizer. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn off this adjustment layer first of all. I'm going to jump over to my effects. I'm going to turn on Warp Stabilizer, put the effect on, and the first thing I get is Warp Stabilizer requires clip dimensions to match the sequence. That's fine, but it also means that what I need to do is before I turn on Warp Stabilizer and use it, I need to go ahead and right-click on the clip, click Nest, Nested Sequence, Nested Pane, Enter, and then I'm going to go ahead and put Warp Stabilizer on top of that. It's going to analyze and do its thing. Final Cut's a little bit more simple, and it didn't matter if the clip didn't match the dimensions of the project. I could literally just go ahead and select on the clip stabilization. Amazing. And it literally, you just turn it on and it does its job, and you play it back once it's done, and it doesn't get in the way. It just shows you a little text in the corner saying analyzing footage in background. And if I just show you on my Untitled project here, if I want to stabilize this, I just turn it on, stabilization, analyzing for dominant motion. Sometimes it could take a little while. Final Cut's not very transparent about how what it's doing. Sometimes it's really, really quick, like just now. And if I play it back, looks amazing. So I cannot express how much time it saved in my editing that I would turn on stabilization just from a little click and it would work amazing most of the time. Sometimes it just couldn't save shaky footage. And also when you've got like things in and out of focus, especially if you've got a foreground in focus and the background isn't, that's not the kind of time for stabilization. That's when you get a lot of weird warping going on with the frame. But for the most part, like these clips here, perfect. And it was just such an amazing experience to be able to do that throughout the whole project. So one of the really big downsides for me of Final Cut is that it doesn't integrate with things like After Effects or Photoshop or anything like that, the Adobe applications, obviously, right? Whereas I have a lot of flexibility with Premiere to be able to do that. And for me, the time that I save doing certain things in Final Cut are made up for by the fact that I need to export stuff out to do compositing work or to do certain titles, for example. in my case, the main title for the Japan video was actually edited in Adobe After Effects. So whereas in Premiere, what I would do is I would simply select the clip that I would want to send over to After Effects, right click and click replace with After Effects composition. And then from there, it would literally be a dynamically linked composition in my Premiere timeline. So if I want to make any edits, I would right click and click edit original, which I can't do right now. I could click edit original, but it's not going to open in Final Cut, not going to open in After Effects. And that for me was a really big thing because I'm so used to using Premiere to jump to After Effects. But what I understand from watching a few videos on YouTube about, I guess, some of the benefits of Final Cut, there are some great titles already built in and very easy to create professional looking titles in Final Cut. This is stuff that I didn't really use a lot of because I didn't need to, but I definitely feel like if you were doing a Kickstarter type video, for example, it's great to have this stuff pretty easily accessible and very easy to edit. And then from there, I think you can actually open a copy in Motion as well. If you want to change certain things, you have the option and flexibility to do that too. So I really didn't want to just, I guess, have a go at Final Cut for not having After Effects integration when you do have Motion integration for titles. But then when it comes to actually compositing certain effects, you would need to open a comp in After Effects, do what you need to do, and then export it out and drag it back into Final Cut. What I really do not like is that Final Cut doesn't allow you to work between different NLEs. Now, if I try and export out now if I select my composition and go File, Export an XML, it's going to export an FCP XML, which is not readable by Premiere. I think it is readable by DaVinci Resolve Lite. So I was actually watching a bit of a tutorial just before doing this video about exporting it through DaVinci Resolve and then going into Premiere after that. It's a bit more complicated. I didn't want to go to all that effort just to show you guys because obviously I can just show you with a few clips anyway, the same kind of things. But definitely if you need to work between the two, if for example, one person's going to be using Premiere in your group and the other person's using Final Cut, that's going to be a bit of a nightmare because you just can't export XMLs and open them between the two projects, between the two applications. So just be aware of that. Now, what is amazing with Final Cut, and the reason that most YouTubers just rave about it, is the render speeds. Final Cut is so optimized for the Mac, obviously it's Apple software, Apple hardware, that I couldn't believe my eyes rendering out this video project. So I had applied color grading, which is very easy color grading because it's the built-in Final Cut color grading, but also then a LUT applied to it, and then a lot of stabilization to each of the clips. And these clips were only 1080 clips, but definitely I know with Premiere, it would still take a little bit to crunch through that and give me a master file at the end of it. Whereas with Final Cut, I sent it to compressor, and if I do this now, I actually just sort of go file and send to compressor. I'm going to show you. And then from there, I'm going to add an output, and I'm going to add my output, my 235 output. Okay, cool. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit start batch. A minute 20. It rendered it out in a minute 20. It's pretty crazy because I think in comparison, I'm just going to find out for you now how long it took in After Effects. All right, so I kind of stopped it after a little while. It was going to take about just under 9 minutes to render out from Adobe Media Encoder. Not a totally fair comparison. It was a more compressed format, but at the same time, a minute 20 from Final Cut. So pretty amazing. That alone is probably why a lot of people switch because they just save so much time rendering stuff out. And I can definitely see that. At the end of the day, what do I think? I think that Final Cut Pro has been a really cool experience to get to know and edit with compared to just always editing with Premiere Pro, which is what I've done in the past. I can see how it's really great for some projects, especially not necessarily professional projects, depending again what those professional projects are, just because collaboration is pretty limited. Communication between applications that would make it more powerful, like After Effects, like Premiere, and like Photoshop in the Adobe world. Obviously, you've got Motion for titles, and motion graphics, not always as powerful as something like After Effects, which is a full-on compositor. But at the same time, just the speed that you get kind of editing through this stuff, I do like that dynamic timeline. I like how the clips move around as I try and fix things because I feel like the way that I work, at least anyway, that makes a lot of sense to me, is when I want to try and push a clip out, it's going to just push the other clip above it, and then I can fix it up that way, or I can leave that clip as it is to create a bit of a J cut or an L cut. Audio editing, I felt like I'd give that definitely to Premiere as well, because Premiere has the clip, or the clips of the tracks, of the video tracks, already separated, so it's easy to kind of edit the audio from there and do it all in Premiere, and I can add a VST plugin to the overall track. I don't think I can do that in Final Cut Pro 10, is what I've kind of discovered so far. And also having to detach each of the audio clips from the video clip did make it a little bit more difficult. So I definitely feel like overall Final Cut is a lot more of a simple to use application. I think that's really what they designed it as, and it doesn't make it a bad thing. It actually makes it really, really good in some cases, because a lot of the times you have a vision in your head and you want to get it down onto the computer and translate it, and Final Cut makes it really easy to do. But there are then some cases which Premiere Pro is a much bulkier application, but there's a lot more you can do with it. And I feel as though if you are working on a project which requires those After Effects compositions and working between the two, there's just nothing like using Premiere Pro in comparison to Final Cut, despite all the speed differences, despite the fact that Premiere Pro chugs in comparison to Final Cut, how it just slices through footage. Even the stabilization in this case, the fact that I had to apply it to a lot of clips, this made it perfect for it. But I guess in a more professional filming environment, if it was a narrative film that I'd done, or I had done more of a documentary kind of thing, maybe not documentary, narrative, or maybe more of a commercial type shoot, I shouldn't really be using the stabilization that much anyway, because hopefully we would have stabilized the video clip through other means, using a gimbal, dolly tracks, whatever else. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the amount of time Final Cut Pro saves sometimes with certain things is made up for by the fact that I would need to then export something out, open it in After Effects, do what I would have done by right-clicking in Premiere. Would I make the switch to Final Cut? Not at this point. I think it's, as I said, it's a great application and I've really enjoyed using it. I think, my Japan video was made a lot easier to edit, and I felt like I just enjoyed using it more as well. I feel as though with Premiere, because I'm so associated with work now, with more, commercial paid projects, it kind of scars me when I open it up after a holiday and I have to go back into editing everything, and I think to myself, oh man, I just feel like I'm doing work. Whereas Final Cut is actually a nice application that makes things really simple and easy for the most part, which hopefully I get to use more of in the future. I think it's just good to realize that at the end of the day, these things are tools, as anyone on YouTube or anyone will tell you in real life, is that it's much like a hammer compared to this hammer. They both do the same thing. One's just a bit different, one has a different handle, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, at the end of the day, I really enjoy using it, and I think it's just good to take in some of those differences. Hopefully this video helps you out if you're going to jump into to Final Cut soon from Premiere. Obviously you'll notice some of those differences straight away, and it's just good to get on the front foot and know exactly what to expect. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope you have a good one.